Okay, so then part two of the last paper we're going to do before we start Churchill next week. So, okay, which of the following was more responsible for the ratification of the 1787 Constitution? Weakness of the Anti-Federalists or the strength of the Federalists? You want to make the case for the weakness of the Anti-Federalists, no?
I do.
Yeah, off you go then. You can start. So,
Off I go. Once I get my notes up, sorry, I'm having a slight issue here. I don't know why is it doing that. Sorry. Okay, so I had trouble deciding which I thought was easier to argue, but I,
yeah,
I ended up going the weakness of the anti-feds.
yeah,
Okay. Um, here are my main reasons for that.
yeah,
Um, so the first is that the arguments of the anti-federalists were negative. They weren't proposing a clear alternative.
yeah,
So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that everybody agrees that the status quo
yeah,
is not acceptable, is not going to work, right?
yeah,
So remember that there were these, rebellions that Shays Rebellion,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
that the Articles of Confederation were too weak to control. So everybody knows something has to change.
Some
Now,
people still wanted to keep it. And that's the problem
yeah, I
with
guess that's true.
this. That was
Some
the only
some some did,
argument.
but I think it was a pretty strong. You could make a very strong, a good case
Net
that
you Rhode Island wanted to keep
they
it.
did. Of course, they did. Rhode Island.
They're
That's
tariff
right.
blocking.
That's right. Um. Okay. So they weren't proposing. They were saying, well, we don't like the look of this constitution, but
Yeah.
they weren't proposing an alternative. Um. And there's widespread. I won't say unanimous, but widespread acceptance that the Articles of Confederation need to be modified in some, I
Yeah.
guess, more radical
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Most people knew
Um,
it wasn't working. Yeah.
yeah, so that's one. The second is that the proposed constitution addressed many of the concerns for the anti-federalists. So it wasn't just an assertion of power over
Ooh,
over a
you
kind
think
of dissenting. I
I
don't know.
think
So I'm saying,
until Madison gives them the Bill of Rights, like I don't think they felt like it was on.
yeah, but that's part of my argument.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
So but it's also implicit in the Constitution.
Mm.
So there are a lot of concessions, of course, for state autonomy in the
Hmm.
Constitution, not least of which is the fact that in Congress, the House of Representatives is proportionate to population.
Hmm.
Okay, so hence the argument over the um, three-fifths clause.
Yeah.
Right. So, but on the other hand, the votes in the Senate, there's only two votes. There's two votes for each state, regardless of the size. So
Hmm.
a small state like Rhode Island, or what would be another small state?
I think it's Rhode Island or the
No, sort of.
but yeah, like Connecticut, Connecticut would.
Connecticut. We don't have Maine yet, do we? Do we
No,
have Maine?
don't we?
Vermont.
Georgia is Georgia would have been quite
So
sensible.
if you're a small state, obviously
I think
you're,
Vermont
you're
comes
worried
in
about
just
you're worried
after.
about the problem. If you're a small state, your problem is you're going to be worried you're going to get completely dominated
New Hampshire,
by
Delaware, they'd be tiny.
New Hampshire. Yeah, New Hampshire for sure. Okay, it's still a small state. So so there were concessions in the Constitution to help address the concerns of the anti-federalists, that that they're that's the power of the states would be weakened too much
Mm.
or overawed by a federal government. Yeah. So those are the two big ones. I've got two other. Okay, and you could add to that. Sorry, you could add to that the Bill of Rights as well is of
Mm.
course additional safeguard, even more safeguards to calm the fears of the
I think
anti-federalists.
especially the 10th Amendment.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Like,
So just a couple of other points, and then
yeah,
I'll hand the baton on to you.
yeah,
Um, Another is that opposition among the anti-federalists is divided.
yeah,
So people had different reasons why they rejected the Constitution. Some lacked credibility.
Yeah,
And by that I mean, of course, some people just had personal a lot to lose uh, by this new proposal, but that's not
yeah,
very convincing. Um, so there's that. On the other hand, I think you had a great degree of unanimity in favor of the Constitution, and
I mean,
you
that
had
only
you
just
had
passed.
just a second. So you had the
Mm.
combination in particular of Madison, Jay, Jefferson,
Yeah,
Hamilton, who are going to split very soon after this into to opposing parties, right? Basically, the first major split in
yeah,
American politics.
yeah,
But at this point, they're working together, and these are gigantic minds. So they have really the big guns arguing in
yeah,
favor of the Constitution.
yeah.
Um, and uh, they're moving in a circle that has a lot of influence. Political leaders, teachers, preachers, editors, lawyers,
Yeah.
literate, the literati. Okay, so anyway, so those are my arguments. That's why I would say that.
Yeah, they were also uneducated, like a lot of them, like rural folk and stuff. So they didn't just have the
Yeah.
organizational backing or the intellect or the writing skills to be able to argue against it. But in terms of it getting overwhelming opposition, like constitution ratification votes, Massachusetts 187 to 168 in the hotbed of it. New York 57 to 47. Oh, sorry, New Hampshire 57 to 47. New York 30 to 27 in New York, only by 3 votes.
Mm.
Virginia 89 to 79. North Carolina and Rhode Island don't even ratify it till later they come in. Of course, Rhode Island would. It's like North Carolina surprised me. You'd have thought it would be South Carolina, given their history of like, starting the Civil War. But like if you look at those votes, they are so, so, so close. You know what I mean? So like like what pushed it over the line? And I think like could the anti-federalist arguments were pretty weak, but I think the Federalists exploited and took advantage of it. I think you've got some of the greatest minds in history, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison writing the Federalist Papers, really important for influencing people. Because when you win by that narrow margin, it's what you can put together as a case. And like, I think that the strength of the Federalists was their position. The Articles of Confederation was failing in pretty much every aspect. They needed something new, and they knew they needed a centralized government. So I think they had the writers, they had the elites. The elites after Shays' Rebellion were absolutely and utterly like, we cannot be having this like populist uprisings happening around the country. So that was what they were even more afraid of in terms of ratifying it. But I think the strength for the Federalists was especially important in James Madison because Madison wrote the Federalist Papers to argue for the government, but then equally wrote the Bill of Rights to placate the anti-federalists. I think he was smart enough. The anti-federalists stayed on like a more pure, this is the purity of the thing, whereas I think the Federalists were more pragmatic as well. Because Madison was
Yeah.
like, we need this, but equally, how are we going to get it through? And if you're looking at those votes, I don't think those states vote for it without the Bill of Rights. I don't.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And
Yeah.
to give you to kind of add on to that, even
Yeah.
if you want to argue for the other side, I find the circumstances of the Constitutional Convention just remarkable, like
Yeah.
astonishing, because the convention was called on the pretext um of amending or changing the Articles of Confederation.
Well, they amended
So
them.
there wasn't people didn't go there wasn't the understanding that suddenly that an entirely new constitution was going to be proposed.
Yeah. Well,
And I think and maybe the reason, of course, the reason they did that was precisely because there would be so much resistance to it.
yeah.
Um, okay, so anyway, so
Yeah, but of course, if this new
very
federal
interesting.
government was designed to put down like Shays' Rebellion and stuff like that, the non-elites aren't gonna, it's not in their interest. What, you want to create a US mint that stops people printing money? Why would the rural farmers want to stop printing money? Why would
Yeah.
the rural farmers, so they had to give them some kind of sop to get it through. I
But
think the fact that,
on the other hand, James, I think because of the problem of debt,
yeah,
I think there's some acknowledgement that even on the financial side, economic growth and prosperity seemed more like could be more likely to be achieved by the Constitution.
For who?
I think if you're looking in
Yeah,
a
but for who? For the
more
elites?
long,
For the elites, for the
yeah,
business owners, for the lawyers. Well, how does that benefit the farmers? And that would be like the Jeffersonian argument afterwards. It's like, who is this country for? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, clearly, yeah. I mean, all the elites lined up behind it. So that means you've got all the top lawyers, all the top newspaper. I mean, you think about it, it's the same coalition arguing for the federal government that was the coalition that basically argued against the Stamp Act, minus
yeah,
the Sons of
yeah,
Liberty.
true, true,
It's the
very
same
true.
coalition of people. It's probably the exact same people. They had Washington and Franklin on their side as well. And you know, Washington. I think again, without Washington, I don't think this gets passed because would you trust anyone else to be the first president of America and step away?
Yeah, that's very important too.
Would you trust
Yeah,
this? I mean, Franklin was pretty much dead by this point, but like you said, he may be, but I wouldn't have trusted any others. I don't think Jefferson or Hamilton or that or Adams steps aside if they're the first president.
yeah, yeah.
Do you?
No, I don't know. I think Washington was a remarkable person in being able to exist as a rallying
Yeah. No one had
point
done it, no, apart from
by people with very
Cincinnatus.
different ideas.
Apart from Cincinnatus, no one had done it in history, no. That's what George III said. They were like, "Oh my God, he's stepping away a second." No, he didn't do Napoleon. You only have to contrast, like, what happened in the Haitian Revolution? What happened in the French Revolution? Both ended
Yeah,
up with dictators.
yeah,
What happened in the English Civil War? We ended up with a dictator.
yeah,
Like, it's remarkable that this is the only revolution, certainly in that time period, that doesn't end up with a dictator.
yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating question. There's a lot you can say about it. But I guess to keep it simple here, you could talk about the remarkable person of Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, the votes
okay.
are so
Yeah.
close. You could argue either way on this quite easily because you could say, like, if the anti-federalists had a slightly better cause or actually a plan, then they might have been able to get it over the line. But I mean, what were they offering people? Stay with the Articles of Confederation. It's clearly not working, and still they almost won it.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
almost won it. I think Madison's key. I think the Bill of Rights is key. I don't think without the Bill of Rights this gets through. And then in the same way as with the essay question before about how important the Bill of
So
Rights is, I think
would that
really
count
important.
as would that count as strength of the Federalists then?
I
The
think
Bill
so
of Rights. Okay.
Because Madison was still a Federalist, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Look, I
he
think
understood I think Madison understood the concerns of the anti-Federalists more than any of the other Federalists did.
yeah. Again, I mean, with this question, for me, I thought you could really make a case for either side, and it would just depend how you worded
Yeah,
your argument,
yeah.
how you framed it. I think you could make. There are some questions where it's clearly much easier to argue one side
Yeah,
than
but
than
what I
another.
like about OCR is in
But
general, most of their questions you can really go at any which way you like. And that's
yeah,
what's good about history. I always hated the subjects like maths where there was a right answer. Boring.
right.
Cool.
Okay.
Then we
All
go
right.
into British colonial
Yeah. Let's.
relations with the settlers were better than British colonial relations with Native American Indians. I'll lead off on this one. I think it depends on what time period you're talking about. I think this question is interesting because them in their own mark scheme are kind of implying Unit 1. But I think you can go Unit 2 because it says with the settlers, and they're still settlers, and they're still British colonials until they declare independence.
Yeah.
So for me, this goes Unit 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And for me, that makes this question split into two sides because I would argue pre 7 Years' War, the relationship was better with the settlers than with Native Americans. Post 7 Years' War, it was better with the Native Americans than with the settlers. And I'll make the case on that. So I would say, like, pre 7 Years' War, the only real thing that's stretching the settlers. I mean, the loss of the giving back Louisburg of the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle at the end of the War of Austrian Succession irritated the colonists. And mercantilism is straining the relationship a little bit, but I would say only in the north where they want to manufacture, and the navigation acts are keeping them trapped in not being able to really build ships, or if they do, they have to sell it to the British. But I think it's a minor thing. I think they accept the price of mercantilism, and the South is obviously benefiting from having a guaranteed market. Yeah, salutary neglect is working really well pre 7 Years'
Yeah.
War, like because they don't know they've got a difference of opinion on what that is. So like I think and socially there's lots of resentment bubbling under the surface. You know, the Great Awakening is starting to move people. I think there's a growing sense of American identity, but I don't think there's any real drive in the colonies for independence pre the end of the Seven Years' War. I think they're more worried about the French. And that leads me into the Native Americans. So obviously pre Seven Years' War, the colonists wanted to expand westward. Like it was the French that were helping the Native Americans. It was the French who the Native Americans were working with, and they were pretty much allied with them. The British had failed to get them to change sides under the Albany Congress when they tried to get the Iroquois to switch. So there were overtures to the Native Americans. But generally, they saw them as savages, and the Native Americans had better relations with the French. The French allowed them to fight with their own tactics. The Native Americans helped them with guerrilla tactics. French weren't really interested in lands. There's a lot more. They were mostly interested in trading first. That worked really well with the Native Americans. Um, Also, there was a lot of intermarriage between the French and Native Americans. The French hadn't brought any of their own women with them. So I would say that the fact that Native Americans were pretty much always majority on the French side in all of the wars would have meant the relationship was not very good. Now, the Seven Years' War changes all of that because of the elimination of the French. So it starts during the war when the French lose Quebec, they can no longer trade with the Native Americans. So the Native Americans start to come around to trading with the British, more or less change sides in the war. Then when the war is over, they obviously still have a strained relationship with Britain. They have Pontiac's Rebellion because they're still British settlers are moving westward. But after Pontiac's Rebellion, the British government introduces the Proclamation Act, and this changes the relationship. And I think the Native Americans then view the British government as their only protector from colonial expansion, which is then further exacerbated with the Quebec Act when they hand that territory back to the Quebecois. And I think all of these things show that post Seven Years' War, the British were protecting Native Americans, whereas pre Seven Years' War, they were seen as the enemy. Whereas the flip side for the settlers after the Seven Years' War is they're stopped from moving westward under the Proclamation Act. They start to chafe under that. The Stamp Act is brought in to pay for the army that's not allowing them to go westward, that army is now protecting Native American lands. So, and then, of course, all of the escalation of no taxation without representation, all the resentment through the Boston Tea Party, through everything, all the way up to the war. So I would say the relationship with the Native Americans in that period from 1763 to 1776 is better than with the settlers, because with the settlers it's deteriorating to the point of a war of independence. Whereas with Native Americans, it's building up to the point where pretty much in the War of Independence, the Native Americans are on the British side, unlike the Seven Years' War. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's I mean I had something similar. I
Yeah,
think it's because there's no date, I
yeah,
think it's good to divide it into two periods.
yeah,
As you said. Did you say at least 1740 to 1763?
yeah. The early Unit One and then Unit Two.
The
Yeah,
unit one.
Post and pre 7 Years' War for me.
Yeah. In that case, yeah, relationship with the settlers is better than relationship with the Native American Indians,
Hmm.
for the reasons you mentioned. You put it very well. Native American Indians were more allied with the French. Um, the I mean, the British colonial relationships with the settlers is an interesting question. So
Yeah,
it's not so straightforward
yeah.
that was an uncomplicated one.
Hmm.
Um, partly for the sa salutary neglect.
Yeah,
So, which means kind of not really much relationship at all. You're sort of leaving the colonists to do what they want. And there's some dysfunction, I think, between the settlers and the British. That's
yeah,
true in this during the Seven Years' War, right?
yeah.
In um, is it the Colorado Valley? I'm
Ohio
getting
Valley.
confused. Ohio Valley, not
Yeah,
Colorado. What am I saying?
yeah,
The Ohio Valley. Yeah.
yeah,
So, but with that, with that said, I think you can say that generally better afterwards for obvious reasons. Once I think 1765 to me is 1763, 1765, you have the Stamp Act.
yeah.
And once there's
1763, the Proclamation Act. Yeah,
and the proclamation. So once you have unrest in the colonies against the British, then the Native Americans and the British have a lot in common, a lot of
Yeah,
common interests.
yeah, yeah.
The British aren't interested in westward expansion,
They don't want.
right? They
Yeah,
don't
it's not
want
even that they don't want
they
to
don't
annoy the Spanish. They don't want to put it into their
they have their
country.
own reasons for that. Of
Yeah.
course, the Native Americans, they hate the settlers. They're the real enemies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the
Yeah.
settlers are expand. So that's worth keeping in mind, obviously, that the interests are completely opposed between the Native American Indians and that of the settlers. Right? Settlers
Yeah,
want
you
to
can't get more
expand.
impressive. Yeah, they want their land. It's like,
Settlers want to expand,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so as relations worsen with the colonists in America, obviously there's more common cause between the British and the Native American Indians. But you can qualify that because again, that's not an uncomplicated relationship.
yeah.
And you could mention, for example, the problem with Burgoyne, Gentleman Johnny,
Yeah.
the hero of this podcast,
Yeah.
um, who
The yes.
who
We use hero in a very loose way.
yeah, I think our opening song should be some kind of piano music that Gentleman Johnny would have played on
Can
his campaign.
we find is
I'm
there a
sure we
recorded
can.
piano music of Gentleman Johnny? Someone must have made a song about Burgoyne.
Oh, definitely.
Let me, while you're looking, let me just look up if there's a Burgoyne song.
So anyway, so the Burgoyne's relationship with the American Indians is problematic, right? So
Yeah,
um I think they cause more problems for him than help him against the rebels.
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so but essentially, I agree.
Mm. Yeah, so I think that's clear. I think that's the easiest way to divide this one up. Like a lot of my students went social, political, economic, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense for this session. I think that sometimes like they're supposed to write 5 paragraphs with 3 body paragraphs, but I think sometimes questions just lend themselves to 2 sides. I think this one you can just make the case. So, but overall, then, which is the best relationship, I suppose? Because if we're going with the settlers pre and post, I would say overall the relationships were better with the Native Americans because in the
Yeah,
end,
I agree. I
because
agree.
because I think that in the end the colonists leave. So I think that they're like fundamentally, if someone leaves you, that your relationship hasn't gone very well. I would,
Yeah,
hmm.
yeah. But the basis of that interest is it's nothing but a set of um common interests.
Yeah,
Or should I say, I mean the British have completely different interests to the Native
yeah.
Americans
I don't think
themselves,
they
but
like. Yeah,
they
I
have
think
a
it's
lot they have interests in common,
yeah.
right, against the settlers. So
The French, when they declare independence, the French try and set up a buffer state, a Native American nation, buffer state between the Spanish and the British. And
wow,
The Americans are like, I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah.
okay.
I think it's a common interest that yeah, they share. I think it's an alliance of convenience. It's an alliance more than a shared value. So I would say even,
Yeah, that's
I mean,
right.
if you're looking at values, you could argue that even when the colonists declare independence and get rid of the British, they still share more values in common than they do with the Native Americans. Because
Definitely.
their independence is based on them being more British than the British. So it's not even like they're appropriate it. Whereas you don't see the Native Americans going, yeah, we're more British than you. Like they just have want nothing
Yeah.
to do with it.
Yeah, all I'm saying is there's no sense of loyalty or duty towards the Native American Indians. There's no recognition that
Or the other
they're
way around. I don't feel like the Native Americans feel any duty towards the British. I just think they realize that's
no,
their only hope of stopping these colonists from going west.
absolutely. And I think they were acting very rationally.
Yeah, I think the Native Americans with the French there was genuinely more, I don't know the word affection's right, but there was warmer, genuine relationships between the French and Native Americans. I'm not going to go too
Right.
overboard. It wasn't like they were too, but more so than with the British. I think with the British, it was just a marriage of convenience.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
All
we're
right.
agreeing that relationship was better with the Native Americans overall.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 And even though it was before pre-7 Years' War. I think that's actually good. I liked these questions when I saw them. I thought they really sort out who's good and who's not.
Right.
Because the 10 markers are easy, but the essays were challenging. The Bill of Rights one is difficult. If you see that in the exam and you haven't prepped for it, it's quite difficult to kind of you'd be like, what the hell has the Bill of Rights got to do with any of these?
Yeah,
Like instinctively, initially, you're like, what's that got to do with the dealing with the problems? But it's like obviously it's through the Constitution.
yeah, indeed, indeed.
Maybe that's why we got three A stars. We got four A stars on that paper last year, and three of the A stars wrote that question on the Bill of Rights and literally wrote about the Constitution, not the Bill of Rights, which I don't think is accurate. But and we got A stars because the examiner was a non-specialist.
Ah, excellent.
Yes.
Should
I
you
mean,
be
I think
saying these
if they'd have
things?
just made the link saying the Constitution doesn't get ratified without the Bill of Rights, then I think they could have gone,
Yes.
into all those things. But if you don't make that link, I don't think you can just talk about the Constitution without the
And
Bill of Rights in.
there's probably a lesson there too for the students when you're trying to answer a question which you're not sure about. And you might not have all of the information there. Making those links is really crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, because what OCR, the good thing with OCR is they allow you to argue whatever you want as long as it's logical. So if you need to pivot off, you need to pivot off, but you need to make that pivot link so that you're justifying why you're talking about something that's a little
Yeah,
off topic,
indeed.
I think. But yeah, I think they're a bit
All
weird
right.
because they seem to be focusing mostly on Unit 1 for their answer on Native Americans and settlers, but I think they're wrong because I think clearly it's up until they're still
Mm,
colonists until they
yeah.
become independence. Okay.
Okay. Should we
Right.
have do we need closing piano music? We can
As
imagine
in
that
music, we'll have to
until
play
we
it. I
find
found a
some.
Burgoyne song. I'll hang up this. We can play it. I'll call you back and we can have a little chat about what we're going to do in the music. All right. See ya. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.